Privyet. Did you have fun last night at the party? So I want to ask a question at the beginning here. How many of you are .NET developers? Was okay. So less than half. Um, so wow, this is really loud. I'm not used to hearing myself this well. Um, yeah, I think there's going to be some feedback. Okay. So this, and how many of you are familiar with semantic logging already, with specifically with the library my team has produced for this? Is anybody familiar with it? Okay, good. Um, so originally this talk was really geared toward .NET developers, but there's a lot of concepts in this talk that really have nothing to do with .NET specifically. I'm going to be showing some examples that are using a .NET library that my team wrote, but I also want to make sure that I want to focus on the concepts that can be translated to any platform and technology that you may be using. I also want to really invite you to interrupt me, to ask questions, raise your hand. I'm very interested in this being an interactive talk from the beginning. So I want to be going through some slides, but again, if there's a thought or a question, please let me know. So logging is painful. It hurts. It's a frustrating experience. For me, it's one of the things that I really have no interest in. I don't want to write logging code in my applications. It's something you have to do. So I want to. The important thing up front is to say that it hurts, and how can we make it hurt less? Let me make my notes a little more visible to myself. Now we know we need it though. So the question is, how can we make logging easier for ourselves? How can we take what is painful, make it cost less and hurt less to do that? I also want to say that logging is increasingly important in modern applications, because it's very likely that many of you are building applications that are not just running a single process on a single computer, but it's distributed in nature. There's multiple components that they're coordinating and orchestrating together. And to really truly understand what's going on in your system, you need some sort of logging so that you can trace how things interact together. But again, it's something where we often feel like it's a distraction from the real work. So the result of this feeling of it being a distraction is that our logs are often very inconsistent in their nature. They don't have structure. As a result, they're hard to consume. Being hard to consume also means that they're hard to automate. If we want to harvest information automatically from our logs, it's very difficult. And that makes it an overwhelming problem. Now, I've described this talk as semantic logging. And what do I mean by semantic? There's a couple of synonyms I could use in place of semantic. Another word might be structured logging, or even strongly typed logging. Creating a semantic log is really changing the way we think about the information that we're logging. The primary idea, so what do I mean by the word semantic? The primary idea here is that we want to deliberately include structure in our logs from the beginning. We need to recognize from the onset that we are going to be reading these logs later. Some human being likely, or maybe some service even, is going to be processing our logs, and we want to make sure that at that later point in time, that what we have in those logs is meaningful. So when semantic logging, we want to embed metadata into our log entries so that we can describe what was logged at a later time and provide a richer insight. Now, my team, I work for Microsoft. My team is called Patterns and Practices, and we put together a library, again, that was geared toward .NET developers building applications on Windows. So a lot of my samples are going to be around that, but I hope there's more that you can harvest from this talk. So here's an example of a typical unstructured log. And really, in some sense, there is structure here. I say unstructured, but there's some structure to it. And this is really, I don't even know where this log came from. It was given to me by one of my peers. But the idea is this is some sorting algorithm here. And if we're coming to this after the fact, we know there's certain information that seems to be important, right? We have these variables, we have this int array, we seem to be swapping things in and out. But what's difficult is that we've lost some of the original meaning that was present in the code. There was a context where a developer wrote these log entries, meaning for someone else to read them, but the context that was written in is lost. So the question is, well, the developer, what they did was they flattened this information into a single string. And when we think about semantic logging, we want to have a multi-dimensional log entry and not just a single flat thing. So what might that look like? So I'm sorry, that's a little small, isn't it? This is a similar log, but in this case, we actually are running our logs out to Azure's table storage. That doesn't really matter that it's Azure. But what we really have here is, actually, can I zoom in? No, I can't do that. Let's see if we can cheat. No, not going to work. Yeah, I just thought that maybe I could get in closer. But what we have here is that we still have a human readable message, right? Like this column is meant to be a human readable message. It's flat in the information. And you can see that I've highlighted the value 5 here. But in addition to that, we've also taken that same information and we've broken it out into individual fields here to maintain some of the structure and meaning of the message independent of it being flattened. Likewise, you can see a different message here where we have a value, the approver. The message actually reads, get expenses for approval for use by a datum and a username there. And in this column that says payload, we actually are identifying a field called approver name and specifying the same name. Now, in the message, we've flattened that payload out into something that is a typical standard log message, but we also maintain it as this more structured data. In addition to that, depending on where you're logging it, you can actually query by those payload arguments more specifically. So this is actually, in a sense, a very, very simple idea to do this. Now, our team is on a mission because we recognize the fact that what my team really wants to do is we want to make software projects successful. You know the statistic, right, that the majority of software projects fail. It's something like 2/3 of all software projects are either late or over budget. My team's job is we want that to be that all projects are successful. So we're on a mission to find things that hurt in software development and try to make them better. And we believe that logging can't just be a check mark. It can't just be something that you do because I was told to do it by my manager. But to change the way we're thinking about it, we want to recognize that our logs will be consumed and we need to be purposeful about that. Now, the approach that we took with this is that we wanted to really break down logging into 3 things, which is, first of all, what are you logging itself? And we wanted to separate that from when do I log that thing, and then where is the log going to be written to? And we think that those are 3 orthogonal concerns that can really be separated out. And this was born. This idea was born from personal experiences that my team had, where we were working on a cloud-based system, and the logs just really hurt to do that. You're very quiet. Are there any questions so far? So, oops. Let me actually switch over to some code. Yes, okay. So this is a sample application my team wrote to demonstrate some of the libraries that we provide. This is C#. And I wanted to give you an example of what some of the code looks like here. And again, actually, let me do this. Yeah, I'm going to duplicate my screen so that I can. So in this particular case, and this language, and again, this particular example is going to heavily use .NET. We have this, we're creating this instance of this log, which is a specific class for ourselves. And then when we're logging our message here, we have, oh, I'm actually in the wrong class. There we go. So I have an example here of a class that is a repository, right? So this is a wrapper around some data access. And what it's really doing doesn't really matter. This particular sample application is actually meant to replicate like a line of business application for processing expenses for employees. But we now have like explicit messages here in our log, like this guy, where where instead of having something that might look like this, this is not my laptop. I don't know how to get a dot on your keyboard. Yeah, I don't know how to get the. I want that character. I just want to say dot. There's not really an object there. There we go. Russian keyboard. I'm clumsy American. Um, switch back and forth. So where you might have something like this, right, in a traditional log. You know, instead of having a simple string that the developer is writing at the place where the log is being written, instead we're having an explicit method call. Now, what's the value of that? Like, why would we actually have this explicit method call? Well, there's several reasons. And one is that if we go into it, this allows us a place where we can actually have all of our logging information consolidated in a single location. And it removes it removes the responsibility about what we're logging, or pardon me, it separates the responsibility of what we're logging from when we're logging it. Back in the other class, here, this is when we're logging the information, right? And so as a developer, we want to make sure that we're logging this at the appropriate place. But we don't actually have to decide all the details at this point in time of what we're actually logging. Now, we might, and we can go to this guy here, and we can actually create that log. But also, if we need to tweak the information that we're capturing here later, we can actually do that at a later point in time to make the log more rich, or even to improve consistency of the log. Now, this, for those of you who are .NET developers, I'll go into this a little bit right now and explain that this is actually using something that is built into .NET beginning in .NET 4.5 that's called event source. You can see here that this is an event source class. This is something that's built into .NET that really is a way to provide low-level logging in Windows. Was there a question, or are you just stretching? Okay. So I'm going to gloss over a lot of the .NET parts, since I think that's the minority in this audience. But if you're interested in that and what that means on the Windows platform, please feel free to come and talk to me later. So we can also see here that we can explicitly set information about like what the level of the event is, any keywords, and we can make these things strongly typed. And this is really about providing consistency in the information that we're logging. And also everything that we're doing, let's see if that works. Yes.
So all this code is made by hand, or you are showing some library, or it's kind of nugget or something. Should I write all this code by my hands?
So
No.
all of this code in this particular case is written by hand. Yes.
No, I mean as a user, yeah. Well, I want to check your logging system. Yes. So So is it nugget, or like there's a lot of code? So should I write all this stuff to use it?
All right. So to restate the question is that, I mean, another way to ask that might be, isn't this a lot of work, right?
No. Well, I'm
to
just
get here.
if I want to make a log, I'm using, I don't know, like maybe code for log, or how it called, like that. So already implemented, already created logs, yeah, from Nugget, for example. For this particular logger, so just you show a pile of codes, and I'm just wondering, so all this should I write in my project?
Great. So when I first saw this example, I thought, wow, this is really verbose. I don't want to have to write all this stuff to achieve these values. Why is this particular code so verbose? Is because it's making use of things that are already built into the .NET framework. That if you want to play well with Windows operating system and some of the native logging capabilities, then this is what's given to you to begin with. But let's say that you didn't. Let's say you're not a .NET developer. Let's say that you are a .NET developer and you don't care to play with these particular libraries. Um, what you would still want to do is have some well-structured way for capturing your log information. So in that situation, I think that you would still be, instead of logging a string, you would still be saying, I'm logging this object that represents the data I care about, that's some representation of the log.
So currently we are talking not about like abstract semantic logging, not about this particular library. Yeah.
So I'm trying to, on the fly, adapt the talk to be more about abstract
Okay.
semantic logging as opposed to being about the specific library. But I can go wherever you guys are interested. Vanessa, we had another question back too. Yes, everything I'm showing you is completely open source, Apache 2 license. I'll give you the URLs in the end, and we accept community contributions too.
I know you and Microsoft like very much XML format.
I hate XML personally, but
but this library is using XML as logging as database for keeping the structured logs, right?
No, not necessarily. So actually, to answer that, let me continue let me continue about the library, and I'll come back to that question about what our library does, and maybe that will give some more information there. I do want to say one more thing about this code though. This code actually personally frustrates me because the information's repeated here, and I feel like it's too verbose and too much heavy lifting to achieve. But if you are using .NET right now, this is still the better way to do it in the .NET space. So, okay. So in our particular library, there's three technologies at play. One is something called event tracing for Windows, which if you're a Windows developer, this is something that's very low level in the operating system. It's a very efficient, fast way for logging. It's native to the Windows platform. It's been around for a long time, since like Windows 2000, I believe. It's really fast, but it's been historically very difficult to use. And in fact, most like .NET developers or managed programmers never used it because it was just ugly and hard to use. In .NET 4.5, which I don't even remember how old it is now. It's been out for over a year, right? For 4.5. Anyway, in .NET 4.5, this event source class was introduced, and that made it easier. It was meant to make using ATW, this event tracing for Windows, easier to do. And it was an extensible idea. It was meant to be sort of a generic way to trace events, but it supported ETW out of the box. But it was still difficult. It was still awkward. So my team came along and we said, well, we want to embrace this. We want to encourage people to do this, but we also want to encourage these ideas of semantic logging. So we're going to build a library that we call SLAB, or semantic logging, the bottom here. And we want that, through that, we want to provide multiple destinations for events that are published through event source. So basically, our idea is we don't care where you store your logs. If you want to store it in Azure on the cloud, that's great. If you want to store it in a flat file, that's fine. If you want to store it in a SQL database, that's fine. In fact, in our most recent release, we now support Elasticsearch as a store for that. There's a question in the back.
Hi.
Hi.
So I want to ask, I see that event source is introduced in .NET 4.5, but and it seems like your library is based basically on this class functionality. So what about .NET 4.0 support?
So that's a good question, and our library doesn't have any support. Semantic logging doesn't have any support for anything prior to .NET 4.5. My team actually has some logging libraries that are available for older versions of .NET, but they don't support the concept of semantic logging. And if you're in that space, if you're building applications that target that platform, what I would recommend is trying to see how you can embrace some of the ideas, but we don't have the tooling to support you there. If you're interested, though, you can talk to me offline, and we can see if we can find something else to help you with that. So we also recognized that people don't want to know about ETW with semantic logging, so we wanted to make sure that they didn't have to think about ETW if they were going to use our library. And finally, we recognized there's a lot of rough edges that hurt, and we didn't want to. We wanted to smooth those rough edges over. So unfortunately, I broke my animations on this slide, but let me try to walk through this. If you were to use our library, the first thing you would do is you would create a custom class deriving from event source. So that's this box way up here. And that was represented in the code I showed you earlier here, because we're deriving from the event source class. Now, that is purely .NET. That's nothing from our library. And so that's what the arrow is meant to represent, that the custom event source is deriving from that. Now, if you're going to be logging, thank you. Appreciate that, thank you. Okay. If you're going to be using our library in process, meaning if you're going to be within your own application where you're performing the logging, if that's where you're going to be writing events to a store, then you can use our library here to have something we call an observable event listener, which you register when your application starts up. It's going to listen to the custom event source that you created, and is then it's going to write that out to whatever sinks you specify. And so when I use the word sync, I mean some location where you're persisting your logs. And again, we wanted to abstract that idea out because it shouldn't matter where you're persisting your logs. That's really a decision that you should make depending on what you want to do. Now, in many situations, you don't want to be performing, additional I/O in the application that you're logging, because that's a heavy weight, right? If I'm every log message that I'm actually writing in process in the application that I'm writing is extra weight that application has to be concerned with. In addition, it may be that you have multiple processes that compose your system and you need some sort of common logging. So in that situation, rather than doing this right here, we actually broadcast the events using event source. Actually, I say we. It's not my team's library. This happens natively and goes through ETW. And then we have an out of process application that's simply responsible for monitoring what ETW is broadcasting. And then that can actually have its own set of syncs. So that's a little bit of the technology that we're specifically using. Again, my original version of this talk was really focused on the specifics of our library, and I'm trying to move that away there now. But what do we provide? What does our library provide? Is that we provide a set of syncs out of the box. That's destinations you can write your logs to. We provide a set of formatters, which is if you're writing to a flat file, how do you want that information to be formatted when it hits the log? We provide this out-of-process service that allows you to listen to what ETW is broadcasting without having to embed it in your application. And I didn't say it, but in fact, if you're using the out-of-process service, you don't even have to take a reference to our library in your application at all. Your application be completely agnostic there. We also provide a tool called Event Source Analyzer, because if you look at this logging code right here, right, it's ugly and it's really error prone, I think. And so we actually provide a tool to analyze that logging class to make sure there's no mistakes. Now the coolest thing, and this is a really neat idea that's platform agnostic conceptually, is this idea of an observable event listener. So how many of you are familiar with reactive extensions? So a handful in the back. I'm going to take a brief aside here from semantic logging. I'm a huge fan of functional programming. It doesn't matter if it's Scala, if it's F#, if it's Haskell, whatever. I strongly encourage all of you to learn a functional programming language if you don't know one. And one of the ideas right now that's very hot in the world of functional programming is this idea of reactive programming. And there are reactive extension libraries for every language out there. If you're doing Ruby, if you're doing Java, if you're doing C++, there's a reactive extension library. Just go to GitHub and search for RX reactive extensions. Well, we decided to make use of reactive extensions for .NET in this particular library, and it yielded some really exciting results. So let me just run through some of the features again real quick of our library. But these are the syncs that we provide out of the box. Not too surprising. We're really excited about the Elasticsearch. That's a non-Microsoft technology. If you're not familiar with Elasticsearch, it's really cool. It's basically a store that allows you to have full text search features and some analytics all baked into one place. And that's kind of neat because, again, it's not a Microsoft technology that we're supporting. And it's also a way for you to do some real-time analysis on your logs as the information is being logged itself. We're also excited about that because this was a true community involvement. We were accepting pull requests for this particular sync, and it was one of our first successful collaborations with doing true open source. Not much to say here. If you're logging to a flat file, do you want to actually save your log messages as JSON or XML or some sort of plain text custom format? And these are all pluggable. Each one of these things is something with our library that you can write your own. If you want, to example, to have your log messages go to RavenDB, you could write a sync to have it go to RavenDB. Why would you want to log out a process? So we provide this out-of-the-box service. I think I've already said it enough, is that it's really about removing the weight of the logging from your core application and to provide more resiliency. So that if my core application crashes, hopefully I'm going to get log messages in the out-of-process service that can help me diagnose that issue. I'm going to skip over that really because you guys aren't really .NET users. This is the testing component we provide, just to say, hey, here's my custom logging instance, and make sure that it's all valid. Because unfortunately, with the event source class, we have to do things like make sure the event ID we're providing here matches this, that the order of these arguments are the same, and that's honestly just tedious extra work that I'm kind of embarrassed about. So now let me get to something that's really exciting. So we create this event listener, and in fact, let me show what that looks like in some of the source code. Let's go back to the slide deck. Apologies. When you bootstrap your application, we have this idea of an event listener. The event listener is basically responsible for listening to the log and then broadcasting the events. Again, that can be to a sync that is inside your application itself, so that you'll be persisting it locally, or it could be to something out of process. But we're using this idea of reactive extensions, and what does that mean? That means that we can treat the events that are being broadcast as a stream, as something that we can iterate over. And what that also means is that we're able to define some sort of filter or pre-processing to those events. So take this for example. If you are logging everything in your system, if you have a very verbose level of logging, you're going to have a tremendous amount of information in your system. Then some critical error happens that causes your system to crash, and you go and look at the logs. You have to weed through a lot of meaningless information to get to the part that you really care about. However, it's really useful to know at a verbose level what was happening right before the crash occurred. With something like reactive extensions, you can actually define in your application that, hey, just buffer these informational log messages, and if we hit a critical log message, then I want to write out everything that happened for 5 minutes before the critical error occurred. So that's a very powerful idea that allows you to keep your logs sparse, but yet have the crucial information that you need when you need it. Again, that's something that we provide out of the box itself, but yet that's an idea that you can employ in any application, any platform that you're working on. Question over here.
I'm just interested in how can if I find a error message or some message that indicates that I need a lot of debug information to dump, how can I go back through stream 5 minutes back?
Okay. So the actually, let me see if I have the code for, well, since I'm not comfortable with this laptop, I'm not going to even bother showing the particular code. So the question is really, how can I have the past suddenly rematerialize at the moment I need it? Yeah, right. So the idea behind it is that when our event listener is going to have some sort of in-memory buffer that's keeping track of events. This is circular buffer, and so that you would say you would set up at the beginning that says, okay, I care about keeping 5 minutes worth of events, or maybe I care about keeping the last 1,000 events, and they will only be in memory. And as new events come in, and that window shifts, you lose the things that you don't care about. But then when the critical moment happens, then you can flush whatever is inside that circular buffer to whatever sync that is relevant to you. So that's at a very high level, that's the idea behind how it works.
I have the same question. If I understand you correctly, if you have message level like information, not debug, this feature allows you to, if you have a critical message, you will have all debug information, which is write down previously in stack. Yep.
Correct. Yes.
So you will not see all debug information from 20 or 30 minutes before. You will have only last 5 minutes, which
Correct.
you needed. Yep.
Yep, that's correct.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah, it's a really cool thing, and since we're low on time, I won't do any demo here, but we can talk more about that if you're interested later. Another concept. Oh, we have another question over here in the back.
So again about this, I can see that it's hugely related to the reactive extensions, what's provided by reactive extensions. Does it allow somehow, for example, we have two separate components that are logging their activities. Can we kind of, with these events, if in one component something critical happens, can we kind of join basically events from one component to another and kind of show them in a sensible way?
So that's a really interesting question. I'm going to take a risk and say I believe that is possible, what you're describing. I have never tried it. So because you could, from an RX level, compose multiple streams together and then write that out. So yes, I believe so, but we should play with the code to actually confirm that
Okay.
that could work.
Thank you.
That does, though, provide an interesting segue to another part of the problem too, which is that if you are processing things, let's say, like right now, all your code should be asynchronous. By the way, if you're doing any sort of I/O, no I/O should ever be synchronous in your system. That's something that the Node community has been pushing, and I strongly agree with that. But the problem when you were writing asynchronous systems is that there's now this issue of correlating what's happening, right? Or maybe we have a distributed system. And so one of the things we just added in a recent release to the semantic logging is this idea of activity IDs, which was actually present in event source in .NET. But it's basically a way to say, here's an ID that I can use to correlate all of these disconnected things that really correspond some logical transaction. So that's another part of the semantic logging idea that I think is valuable, is to have some sort of correlation ID that can be used to reconnect a stream of events that actually go together, because we can't necessarily always believe that a linear stream of events represents some sort of logical unit of work in our system. Again, I want to say that we're really excited because with our recent release, it was all community involvement. And again, if you're a .NET dev, we would love to have you submitting pull requests to this project. As such, here's some of the ways to get involved with it. We have the documentation available here. Again, we want any feedback, any contributions. If you are a developer who works on other platforms and would like Microsoft to pay some attention to your platform and address these ideas, harass us. Let us know.
What part of code I should write myself, and what I can do in declarative way, so I can see I use attributes and other tools, but what library can help me, and how can I choose storage, MS SQL, Elasticsearch, everything you told about?
So, so several parts to that question. One part is what do you have to write yourself, and what can be declarative and what can't be declarative. So you're going to have to create, if you're .NET Dev doing this with our library, you're going to have to use event source and derive from that. And you're going to have to create a set of custom methods that are decorated with attributes that describe the meaningful parts of your system that you want to log. So that's how the information's captured. So that right now is still, I think, a little too tedious to do, but that's the reality of the situation there. Now, with respect to where do you write the information out to, how do you choose the appropriate sync to use for your application? The great thing about this approach is you can continuously change your mind about where you want to write your information out and the format that you want to write it out to. Once you go into production, you want to have a pretty good idea there. But during the development phase, you can actually be writing these events out in process to a console to see what it looks like there. And then later on, you can say, well, I want to use Elasticsearch, and you can just simply change some configuration values, and you're now going to Elasticsearch. Once you're in production, it is, of course, obviously harder to do that, but there is no reason why you couldn't change where you're storing your logs after in production, especially if you're using something out of process. I think the real truth, real reality of the situation too, is that it depends on the constraints of the business that you're in right now. And you're probably want to do the simplest thing that works, but the really important thing is to embed the structure in your logs as early as possible, because that will provide value no matter where you're writing the logs out to. Does that address the question for you?
Yeah, thanks.
Hello, my name is Denis. This library writes many logs, and my question is, can we have some tool to analyze these logs and maybe find some bugs in our program?
Yeah, so this particular library does not do any of the analysis for you. However, if you're logging to a sync like Elasticsearch, that is going to provide you a platform that you could use to do analysis. Now, this question actually came up yesterday when I was talking to some other people about semantic logging, and we're not there yet. We've just begun to think about that exact question ourselves. So it's technically possible, but we don't have a solution to recommend to you right now other than choose some sort of mechanism. You could even be writing your log files right to Hadoop, right? And you could then be using some analytics there to do that. Those are decisions that we haven't explored yet. There was another question. Oh, sorry.
So I have two. One thing is about that backtracking when you have a critical exception. Does it mean that you have to wait like 5 minutes before you have something in log? Because you have out of order messages?
Yeah, so if you choose to use a filter like that with reactive extensions, that would mean that your log would be empty until you hit a critical message.
Okay.
Though you can also have a situation where you have multiple event listeners, where there's one listening for critical messages that will give you a specific dump that could be writing to a console, a flat file or something, and they have another event listener that is doing its own thing, writing out constantly at a different information level.
Okay, and another part, what about some source code information, where it come from event, or do I need to provide it?
So you mean like a stack trace in there?
Okay.
So in our library, that information is not present. That is something that could be added depending on the platform. Are you a .NET dev specifically, or?
No.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be platform specific, and that in our library currently we don't capture that information.
As I understand, I should run your library like Windows service or console application, yeah. And if I have a cluster, should I run, for example, 5 nodes or 10 nodes? Should I run this application in every node?
So possibly. It depends on if you need to orchestrate the log information between those individual nodes, right? So if you need some sort of consolidated view of your system, then yes, you could do that. But you might, for example, have multiple of these. You might have multiple of these listeners, one for each node, that were writing to a common sync, for example. And in which case you would want to have some sort of unique identifier to know, well, this log information came from the node with this identity, and this one came from this identity. But that's primarily a question of whether or not it's going to provide value for your application. I suspect in many cases, yes, you would want to do that.
Okay. And second question, as a developer, for me is like the most distraction when my log is not working. Something happen on production, and something can happen with logs. Is there any in the application any way to check if your application not working and I don't have any log information? How is it like?
So do you mean if your logging system's broken?
Yeah.
Basically, how do you know that it's broken?
No, how can I restore it? I found why it's broken, because it's the most, for me, was the most frustrating information. We wrote logs in database in sync indirectly.
Yeah, so my recommendation there is to actually treat logging like a feature of the application. So it should be something like all features you want to verify that the feature is what you thought it was, right? I mean, like, I'm an advocate of like test-driven development and behavior-driven development, where you test some of these things first. So I actually recommend that test the logs to make sure that it's actually giving you what you expect to give it. And in fact, that one bit of code I showed here on this guy, this is a unit test, right? That actually goes out and makes sure that, in the very least, our logging class is consistent with itself. That doesn't necessarily make sure that we're writing out to the sinks when we expect to, but at least make sure there's no inconsistencies in the logging class itself. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, I think. So so that's one thing I'd recommend doing for that problem.
Okay, thank you.
Have time for one question only.
Okay, I actually had a couple of questions, but I'll stick to one. But first, let me express my opinion about your whole talk. First, thanks. The idea is quite good, I feel. I'm actually a Linux developer, don't have anything to do with
You can run
.NET.
Linux on Azure, by the way. Just
Okay, that's good. But the implementation so far and the code you have to write to support this thing is, I feel, quite clumsy. So this probably needs an improvement. But what I want you to say a couple of words about is how this idea, not the system, but this idea empowers developers and particularly support teams,
right,
to make better decisions and to probably repair some product, especially in distributed systems.
So what I heard just now was a statement, not necessarily a question. I mean,
there were two parts.
Okay.
First, a statement, and the second, a question that not really related to the first statement. How this idea empowers developers and support teams to make better products and better support them.
Okay. So why is this valuable to do, right? Why would I do this at all? The reason for doing it is that logs are hard to process, and we want to make it easier to process. And ideally, I mean, I think the best case is really to have some sort of machine unsupervised analysis of our system, right, that can be ingesting the log information and then providing us some sort of like notifications about potential problems in our system. I think that's like a beautiful place to be. But the short-term value is that it makes the log information more consistent. It means that those who are responsible for troubleshooting the system don't have to do as much work to understand what's going on inside the logs. It means when there is a problem that we don't have to go back and reverse engineer the context that the information was captured and that we have it available to us there. And I think we're increasingly in a world where the distinction between who is the developer and who is operations is vanishing, right? We live in a DevOps world now, is the phrase I'm hearing a lot. And so that also means that as developers, we need to be more mindful about how this information is going to be consumed after these services are deployed and in production. Did that address your?
Partially. So essentially, you say that by splitting what we log and when we log and reducing the types of information that we log, we make a log analysis simpler.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we need to reduce diversity in logs to make the analysis simpler.
Well, I don't know that I would say reduce diversity. I would say improve consistency. Because you want rich information in your logs, and diverse information isn't bad. It's just that we don't want to. We want to preserve as much structure and as much metadata, as much schema about what we're logging as possible, so that we can, when we're analyzing it later, have a greater context, a richer context for understanding what is going on in the application.
I'm sure you have another questions, but our time is up. Please find Christopher somewhere in the conference and ask them your questions. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.